Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the latest discussion of ISM Supply Chain Planning Forecast. I'm Kristina Cahill, and I'm standing in for Dan Zeiger with Institute for Supply Management. Today, we'll be discussing the latest forecast results, and I think there are some things you might find very interesting. I'm joined by Susan Spence, who is chair of the ISM Manufacturing PMI, and Steve Miller, who covers the other 90% of the U.S. economy. He is chair of the Services PMI. Thank you both for joining us today. I just want to make one quick comment before we begin. Today's discussion is based on the latest forecast results, but that is the exact same panel that applies our ISM PMI on our monthly report. So these are the senior supply management executives who have their finger on the pulse of the economy. They have direct visibility into supply, demand, pricing, inventories, and planning decisions. So while the manufacturing report tells you what is happening right now, the forecast is going to give us an idea of what's coming in the future months. So I want to ask you both, Sue, I'll start with you for a broad reaction. What did you think from the manufacturing side are the biggest takeaways of this report?
Thanks, Kristina. And from the mighty 10%.
The ones that start everything.
We start it, you finish it. It's all cool. I got a big smile on my face because we have had improvement in what people think are going to be happening in everywhere. It's positive except prices, because we don't want higher prices. But if you take a look at what's going on in manufacturing and what's being forecast and predicted by our panel as of now versus December, revenue back in December was going to be 4.4. It's just about doubled, right? So the increases that we're going to see in revenue is up in, the operating rate is slightly up. Production capacity prediction was going to be 5.2. It's up to 9.7. So, same with capital expenditures is up. Prices, unfortunately, and we all know why, and we're seeing that monthly. In December, the prediction of price hikes by June was 5.4. It's been 11.9, and they feel they are going to go up 10% higher for the rest of the year than they thought it would in December, of 4.4 versus 14. So pricing is a problem. We're going to talk about that, but that is no surprise given the last couple of months. Employment, we thought it would go up they thought it would go up about 0.4. Now the prediction is 1.4. So I'm feeling good about the numbers. If you look at the number of industries and sectors in manufacturing that are in the positive area, it's either the same or down slightly. Not as much, not enough to really worry me. Of course, 11 industries thought prices were going to be hiked in December, when they predicted in December, and virtually all but one are actually seeing it and predicting it. So I'm encouraged. Employment still remains kind of stubbornly flat, not a surprise given what we're seeing. And, I feel the same as I did last month about what would break that. And I think we have to, have some action on inflation. We'll see if manufacturing has come further along than AI. We'll get to that later on. I don't believe there is going to be the one-for-one replacement AI agent versus a manufacturing labor. I don't believe we're going to see that, but certainly they're coming along in their application. So encouraging overall, and we really need a stop on this inflation. We need an end to this war. And I think we're really going to be able to unleash a pretty nice year for us.
And then, Steve, turning it over to services, what stood out to you? Are you seeing similar results, or how did you find the results?
Yeah, I was, Kristina, thanks. I was surprised at how big the numbers were. The increase over December to now, I expected to be a little bit more muted, but it seems like there's quite a bit of optimism still out there. If you can call an expected prices increase of 8.9% year over year is optimism, given that they're already up 7.7% through June. an expectation of 8.9% for the year seems like a pretty conservative number, which means, up another 1.2% for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
That's a pretty moderate prices paid index, annual index of about 2.4 if it continues that way. So we'll see what's all in the prediction. Probably a lot of expectations around fuel costs coming down and what kind of impact that'll have. Services sector capacity to produce products and services is expected to increase 7.1% versus 3% last year, and 2.1% predicted in December. So optimism there in terms of building capacity. And that's against employment, which we know is a big driver of capacity for services, only expected to increase 0.9%. So back to Sue's comment around, are we starting to see AI potentially impact us from a productivity standpoint? Looks like possibly yes, because the operating rate right now is 91.7%, which is the highest it's been since at least December of 2020. The 8.6% growth in revenue with an 8.9% growth in prices, knowing that labor is a huge component of cost for services. They're going to have a lot of productivity in order to be able to hit that revenue target profitably with headwinds of the expected pricing. Large shift in those predicting higher capacity in 2026 from 73% predicting no change in December to 79% predicting an average of a 13.6% increase. So they must be seeing something. Otherwise, that shift from being largely flat to increasing that significantly, I think, is a really good sign. And retail trade, we're going to talk a little bit later as we go through the questions. Very interesting kind of mix of numbers for them and where they stack in the top 10s across many of the indexes. But I really like the operating rate distribution compared to December, and numbers overall very positive, especially the revenue growth increase, knowing that we were going to have those headwinds of prices. Really, really positive results.
Thank you. So let's take it back to that operating rate section of the report. What is the ideal operating rate? I know it's watched really closely. What do those results suggest about how much room companies have to grow and whether they're operating at near normal levels, or how's that looking?
So putting just kind of some of my past experience into play from a consulting perspective, depending on where you were in consulting services, anywhere between the high 60s to the high 70s was a great operating rate. If you were operating a rate any higher than that, you were basically minting money because you were covering all of your fixed costs in the high 60s and then lots of profitability higher. The problem with overall services being over 90, which is, like you said, the highest since it's been at least since 2020, is that if there's a boost in demand, you don't have capacity to cover it. And then you start seeing in our monthly report, you start seeing that backlog increase and that number on supplier deliveries to the extent that their services deliveries going up. So it's good news in that people should be operating profitably when they have a high capacity utilization like that, high operating rate. However, the other side of that, if they haven't built upside flexibility into their supply chain, big demand can be a problem.
I would imagine that was the same for the manufacturing side, Sue. Is that basically how you see it as well?
I actually, just thinking back on my experience, and this is more from the 29 years in aerospace versus the 10 in transportation logistics services at FedEx. My recollection is that our operational leaders were happiest if we were sitting around 90 because they had 10% surge capacity. Now, again, that could be just sector specific. But like Steve said, if you have no surge capacity and you're well above 90 or even in mid 90s, you've got growing backlog and then you've got the pipeline clogged up. So, this is where an application of AI could be very helpful, yet that kind of keeps employment not growing by leaps and bounds. So if you've got a fully employed workforce in your company and you have tools at your disposal that can do the work, that can get you beyond what your normal search capacity is, that's great. I don't see it as much yet in manufacturing. And then the question is, well, how far over can you get? Well, it depends on what the tools can do. And, some of these tools are independent, I suppose, but some are not. And, so what are you doing to have an automatic search capacity by having the tools ready to go? It's not a mystery right now, but the proper application, can you have a factory that's what we call lights out manufacturing? It's going to run all over the place. It's going to run around the clock, and you're going to have minimal human intervention, right? So, 90 might not be the right numbers. Just my recollection is that we're thrilled if we were in the, mid to high 80s hitting 90. And then at some point you outgrow your factory, right? Or your footprint.
Well, let's pivot it back over to revenue and CapEx. I think I was actually quite surprised when I saw these revenue numbers, but maybe Steve or Sue, whoever wants to pick it up first, do you want to do a deeper dive into revenue and CapEx and how that's playing out?
I mean, if you don't mind, Steve, the revenue number, it's such a great number, was 4.4. Now they're expecting 8.4. It completely made sense given the last 3 months monthly report, right? Because we have, as of last month, we got I think it's a 5-month trend on new orders and backlog and production. I think it's in its 7th month, if I recall it. So the orders are finally starting to flow. The sentiment's better than it has been, but that's a pretty big pop. And does it, by the end of the year, does it make up for the trauma and chaos of 2025? We'll see. I think everyone would feel better if employment was going that way too, and if prices paid wasn't taking an even bigger leap. As Steve said, if that's outpacing revenue, in the end, what kind of wash are you going to have for your profit margin?
Yeah, and Sue, I think calling out the monthly PMI, same thing. You look on the services side, the last 4 months readings have been higher than every other number going back to October of 24.
Yeah.
So I think that there's good reason to have some optimism, seeing continued strength and hopefully settling over in the Strait of Hormuz and some reduced friction there. The revenue numbers, when you look at one of the things I love about the semi-annual is it gives you some breakout of that old boss that said, half of you are optimists, half of you are pessimists. So everything works out fine in the end when you give me your So you look at the services revenue, that you've got 81% predicting an average increase of almost 13%. And then you have 15% on the lower end that are 11.3% negative on average. And then when you look through the overall list, you can kind of see where industries in the services sector rank in terms of those that are saying we're going to see a really nice increased revenues or predicting significantly increased revenues. And mining and retail trade are right up at the top. Down towards the bottom, transportation and warehousing and educational services, and accommodation and food services. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a potential balance out on how those numbers are coming. Even though when you look at the percentage ranges from the semi-annual report, it's an average of companies, not of industries. And then the industries, you can see which ones are most favorable and least favorable. So really, really good numbers on revenues. And then on the capacity side, you also saw some really nice numbers in terms of increased capacities. So it looks like overall optimism, Kristina, across the whole sector.
Which is great, because in the monthly reports for so long, it was a lot of stress and uncertainty. So it's really great to see these positive numbers coming in. But on the other side, let's take a look at something a little bit more controversial, I guess, is the employment picture, because, what does the forecast tell us about these hiring expectations on both sides? Are they comfortable adding staff? Are they still holding back? How are they managing their labor?
Yeah, and Sue, we'll jump back and forth. Feel free either way here. On the employment number, one of the things that I thought was interesting, where we have the retail trade. Retail trade is the top of revenue, second in revenue, second on increased capacity ranking, and top at employment ranking in terms of adding folks. But what you see when you look across revenue, capacity, and capital investment is that 15 or 16 of the companies are on the positive side, or sorry, of the industries are on the positive side. You get to employment, we've got 9. So an even split, nine industries up, 9 industries down, for an overall number of 0.9% increase in employment. And then when you look back at the monthly PMI, you see employment 47.9, 48, 45.2, 51.8, 50.3, 51.7, 48, 48, 47, 46, all entirely consistent of, yes, we'll invest in capacity, might read that as AI, but we're not hiring a bunch of people. So it all seems very consistent with what we've seen basically over the last year for the monthlies. To put it in perspective, though, again, the 0.9% is right in the middle of what we actually saw over the last 3 years. So if you go back for 2023, 24, 25, the employment number averages 0.9% growth, which is exactly where our forecast is now. So not a shocker, not saying the world is ending, pretty consistent with what we've seen over the last 3 years.
And then I know, Sue, you've got 7 industries leading your employment numbers: electrical equipment and appliances and components, and all the way down transportation. We've got printing, furniture, computer, and electronic products. Those are all expecting to have some employment increases, but are you still seeing those backfilling delays and the issues?
When I think about the sectors, right, we have 7 projecting growth, 11 that are not. Of the 11 that are not, 2 of them are big 6. Chemical products, and anytime chemical products is not, in the positive realm, I worry, because it goes into so much, and it's such a big piece of manufacturing GDP. Petroleum is the other one that's a big 6 that is not increasing employment. It doesn't really surprise me, but also I think it was petroleum is one of the only ones that we're not predicting a revenue increase. So petroleum,
that's right.
Right. Petroleum showed up a couple times as the one that's not like firing on all cylinders, which some may think is curious, but what's going on with the Middle East conflict, and it's temporary, I think, is what's going on. So on employment, one could say a 0.4 prediction, a 1.4, it's triple as good as it was in December, but it's still so small, the 1.4. So, the other industries that are not predicting an employment increase of any kind: textile mills, non-metallic minerals, primary metals, plastic, rubber, miscellaneous manufacturing, paper, wood, apparel, poor apparel, and leather products. They're just having a heck of a time. But chemicals being in there, interesting. So, as Steve said, perhaps the holdback is because perhaps by the time we need to have more labor, maybe we could substitute it with AI. And I will wait until we get to the special questions, because I saw a very interesting development and maybe leap forward for manufacturing. So, maybe the last year taught these companies that things can be so chaotic, especially with economic policy, and not kind of know what's going to happen next, that maybe, yeah, we're going to increase our capital expenditures a bit for manufacturing. They're going from 3 to almost 5%. It's not the hugest leap. It's, still almost double. But the people, people are also, it's harder to find them. It's expensive to recruit. And, maybe they want to be a lot more sure about what they hope is going to happen before they start backfilling with folks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We'll see. We'll see.
Do you guys want to take a deeper dive into the prices and cost pressures? I mean, I know on the services side, we've had like this whopping streak of 108 consecutive months of price increases. On the manufacturing side, there's been, is it 20? Yeah, 20 months of consecutive months of increasing price cost pressure. So what did the forecast say is to be expected on that? Maybe you want to start, Steve?
Sure. So we have two pieces in the report. One says what have we seen up until June, and then what do we expect the end result to be for the full year. We had a pretty big number. These were numbers that were bigger than what I expected. Even though we've seen consistent increases in prices paid, my assumption is that even with the petroleum cost increases, and having a number around 70, we weren't up in the numbers that we saw during the recovery from COVID, where we saw 7, 8, 9% inflation rates, where where our services prices index for the monthly report was up in the 80s. So we're 70, 71, figuring maybe we're going to see 5%. 7.7% through June, is from a prices paid standpoint, effectively a 15% inbound inflation rate. We saw in our special questions our expectation to pass along petroleum price increases and tariff increases. I believe it's about 50%. We'll jump into those numbers in a minute, but very high prices paid, and then looking in the industry, very low inflation once you take out petroleum costs from a consumer standpoint. So certainly one to keep looking at. The other piece of it is 7.7, but we're expecting 8.9 for the year. So 7.7 through June means most of the respondents are expecting to see recovery during the rest of the year, where we're going to moderate that inbound.
Right. Yeah. I think likewise, for manufacturing, 11.9 through June, and then a total of 14.1 for the year. So kind of the same, front loaded. In May, our prices index thankfully dropped by 2.5 points to 82, but it's still in the 80s, right? And in April, it was 84.6. It's just high. 43 commodities are up. We have a lot of talk now about a rate cut, right? Kevin Warsh just had his first Federal Open Market Committee meeting. He did a press briefing. It's high, and like Steve mentioned, and we'll get more into it, the oil impact has been relatively, it's been bad when it's happening, but it's not going to be a big long-term issue. But everything else and the increases there. And this is all before you start to see what's going to happen at the end of the 150-day tariffs that we have, which is, I think, July, right? Some of the section tariffs that replaced, and yes, they were only 10 to 15% that replaced the other IEEP tariffs in February. And so what are we going to start seeing as the federal government starts coming to their conclusions on the studies that they have to say before they will say, okay, well, this country deserves this kind of tariff. So that shoe hasn't dropped yet, although I think we saw something on Brazil recently. So hopefully it's no more than 14.1, but it's not been good. And perhaps there'll be a rate cut, but another reason I think it affects employment, right? Companies, if they're going to face these kind of increases or worse, they got to cut somewhere, or they have to figure out how to preserve margin somewhere. And if they could do it and hit their production numbers with their, to support their new orders, and if they could do it without adding people, I think that they will.
Well, let me kind of take it to what the biggest risks of the outlook. And if you want to bring in some of the special questions, we did have an audience question that came in about the role of AI in supply chain planning forecast. Now, we did have a couple of questions about AI in the forecast this month, and they have to do with AI and the role of hiring. So on the manufacturing side, or what, maybe, Sue, you've just been speaking, so maybe Steve, you want to talk about the questions that we asked about how AI is going to affect hiring. Is it affecting hiring? And then we also looked at what kind of AI is being used in supply management.
Sure. So what I thought was really encouraging is that there were only 18% of respondents that said they're not using AI within their businesses. So very consistent with other information, that we're reading out in the press around people piloting and trying. But it was nice to see in the services sector that there's a large percentage of companies that are using AI. What we also saw, and which is also entirely consistent, is that only 18% of the companies have any negative impact to employment as a result, at least currently, in application of AI. 9% say that they're not hiring because of AI. In some areas, and then they also 9% also say they've had some layoffs with the introduction of AI. But 73% are saying that so far no noticeable impacts, and 9% are saying they've hired new roles. So overall, very reasonable, I think, spot to be at the stage of maturity of AI and driving productivity improvements, which I think is a clear expectation in this forecast that productivity improvements are going to be driven.
Yeah. And our numbers are very similar. So, 76% say AI so far hasn't had noticeable effects on hiring, layoff, decision, and business. I will also say it's early yet. And, my wish would be that the companies go great guns on AI and become more productive, and that there are replacement roles or new roles. I'm not sure if it's going to be a 1-for-1. But wouldn't it be great if these companies can increase their output, still hire folks, even if it's in a different skill set, and have wonderful productivity? So, the AI bubble discussion seems to have died down a bit, but, there were folks, I'll remind you, those of you that were working, that said the internet is just a passing whimsy. Don't you worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Say, you know what? Thank God for the internet. I mean, lives are better. There are certainly some negative portions. That's a whole social media and mental health discussion we won't have today. But in manufacturing, and my advice to young folks trying to figure out their college major, and if I'm a CPA, is there any future in that? Listen, you got to be flexible and you got to be resilient, but you got to start thinking about how do you interact with agentic AI, generative AI, because like the internet, it's coming, right?
Yep, it sure is. Well, I think it is time for us to end, but I just want to, we covered a lot today, and I want to thank you both for joining us today and sharing your perspectives. Really interesting stuff, and we'll definitely be available by email if anybody has any further questions that they want to send over. We're always willing and happy to hear those questions and answer them. Thank you both so much for joining us today, and for some people in the background that helped us out, Angela Miller, Dan Zeiger, Jennifer Stevens, thank you for your help today. That's a wrap, and we will catch you guys for the next manufacturing and services PMIs next month.
Thank you, Kristina.